On a winter morning in December 2018, in the Appalachian foothills of West Virginia, paramedics arrived at a small rental house on Park Street to find an 8-year-old girl in the final stages of death. Her body temperature registered below 84 degrees Fahrenheit. Her heart had stopped. When emergency room staff at Plateau Medical Center cut away her clothing, they discovered more than 140 distinct injuries covering nearly every inch of her 51-pound frame, bruises in varying stages of healing, burns consistent with cigarette contact, lacerations that had scabbed over weeks prior, evidence of sexual trauma so severe that investigators would later describe the scene as one of the worst cases of child torture documented in state history. The medical examiner determined she died from sepsis triggered by untreated necrotizing pneumonia, a lung infection so advanced it would have caused visible symptoms for days before her final collapse. Yet no adult in that house had sought medical care. Her name was Riley Jolene Browning, and for 8 years multiple institutions designed to protect children had known she was in danger. 3 months earlier, and 500 miles northeast, in a New Jersey suburb, another child had died under circumstances that would shock even seasoned trauma surgeons. 3-year-old Charlotte James Dawkins arrived at a pediatric emergency room with catastrophic head injuries, her caregivers attributed to falling downstairs. But when doctors examined her small body, they found every single rib fractured at different stages of healing, indicating systematic abuse over weeks. Cigarette burns dotted her torso. Bruises shaped like adult fingerprints marked her abdomen. Her face was so swollen and discolored that family members could identify her only by the golden curls framing her battered skull. She never regained consciousness. Like Riley, Charlotte had been seen by teachers, relatives, and medical professionals who noticed injuries and behavioral changes. Like Riley, she was failed by adults who chose silence or denial over intervention. These are not isolated tragedies separated by geography and circumstance. They are parallel case studies in how child protection systems fracture under the weight of understaffing, judicial bias, and societal willingness to accept convenient lies over uncomfortable truths. Before we continue deeper into these investigations, if you're drawn to true crime documentaries that examine not just individual crimes, but the systemic failures that enable them, subscribe now and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. These stories matter because they teach us to recognize warning signs and demand accountability from institutions we trust to safeguard the vulnerable. Riley Browning entered the world on a July afternoon in 2010, born to 25-year-old Janice Shelton and 23-year-old Marty Browning Jr. in a small West Virginia hospital. Her mother would later recall the sunlight catching her newborn daughter's fine blonde hair, inspiring the nickname that would follow Riley until her death: Sunshine. From infancy, Riley developed along her own trajectory. She moved across floors in an unusual spider-like crawl, rising onto hands and feet, rather than crawling on her knees. Her first word was a clear "mama," not the typical babbling syllables. At 9 months, she stood and walked 3 confident steps into her mother's arms. She slept well, ate with appetite, rarely cried. Her hair took on a strawberry blonde shade that complemented her blue eyes. She loved baths and insisted on wearing dresses, particularly those featuring Disney's Rapunzel in her signature purple gown. This early period represented what Janice would describe as an idyllic chapter before darkness descended. Marty Browning Jr. presented a stark contrast to his daughter's sunny disposition. A 23-year-old with a history of drug dealing and an explosive temper, he had never wanted to become a father. When Janice announced her pregnancy in late 2009, his reaction was immediate accusation, convinced his diabetes had rendered him infertile, and therefore the child could not be his. This foundational suspicion bred ongoing aggression that manifested in physical violence even before Riley's birth. Janice instinctively shielded her abdomen during attacks, protecting her unborn daughter from blows. Hospital staff at the maternity ward found Marty's behavior so disruptive during labor, shouting at nurses and berating Janice as she delivered, that they expelled him from the room. This pattern of volatility continued after Riley's arrival. When Riley was 17 months old, Marty launched a particularly vicious assault, striking Janice, choking her, throwing her against walls, dragging her by her hair across the floor. A steel-toed boot to her face shattered her front tooth. Throughout these episodes, toddler Riley screamed and begged in her limited vocabulary for the violence to stop. But her cries only intensified Marty's rage. Sometimes a family friend named John intervened. More often, Riley witnessed her father attempting to drown her mother by bending her backward over the kitchen sink or trying to force her head into the oven. In 2012, when Marty was arrested for copper theft from a local mine, Janice seized the opportunity to flee with 2-year-old Riley to a friend's house. For 2 months, mother and daughter lived in relative peace. But in April, Marty appeared at the door armed with a gun, forcing them to return under explicit threat of violence. Janice began planning a more permanent escape. When Riley turned 23 months old, they managed to reach a rehabilitation program for mothers with children, a facility offering both housing and support services. On the second morning, while Janice was out purchasing diapers and left Riley sleeping in the care of John, another of Marty's associates arrived. When Janice returned, Riley was gone. Marty had taken the child at gunpoint. He immediately launched what Janice would later describe as an information war, contacting extended family members with fabricated stories about Janice's drug addiction, claiming she abandoned Riley to get high with strangers while he provided responsible care. His next move demonstrated calculated manipulation of the legal system. He filed for emergency custody without notifying Janice, submitting documents alleging she had spent several days using drugs in a van with 2 unfamiliar men, then abandoned Riley with them. The allegations were entirely false, but the court lacked any contradicting evidence from Janice, who had not been informed of the hearing. Judge Matthew Dean England of Fayette County Family Court reviewed the case and noted both parents had histories of substance use. He ordered them both to complete detoxification programs and reassess custody afterward. Janice successfully completed treatment, secured employment, and found stable housing by September 2012. A court-appointed mediator then established what appeared on paper to be equitable 50-50 custody. However, Marty's life circumstances were shifting in ways that would prove catastrophic for Riley. Working at Ace Adventure Resort, he met Julie Tichenell, a single mother with 3 children from different fathers. They began dating in November 2012. When Janice entered a relationship with a man named Jeremy Risson in March 2013, Marty's response was characteristically aggressive. Upon learning of Janice's new partner, he unilaterally removed Riley from the agreed custody arrangement and moved her into Julie's household without court notification or informing Janice of the relocation. Rather than finding Marty in contempt of court for violating the custody order, Judge England modified the arrangement to give Marty more than 50% custody. Riley would now spend weekdays with her father and Julie's family, returning to her mother only on weekends. Over the following 4 years, Judge England would consistently maintain this arrangement despite mounting evidence of abuse and Janice's increasingly desperate petitions to protect her daughter. The household Riley entered at age 3 functioned as what survivors would later describe as a hierarchy of cruelty. Besides Julie and her 3 children, the home included Julie's sister, 35-year-old Sherry Tichenell, a woman with long dark hair whom family members universally feared. According to testimony from children who lived in the house, Sherry held absolute authority and immediately targeted Riley with particular hatred. The reasons were both racial and circumstantial. Sherry openly despised Riley's mixed-race heritage and resented that she was not Julie's biological child. In this environment, Riley became the designated scapegoat, the child upon whom the adult's frustrations and anger would be systematically inflicted. The first concrete warning signs emerged when Riley was approximately 3 years old. Janice began noticing unexplained bruises and injuries that had not been present when she dropped Riley off at the start of the week. In September 2015, a 5-year-old Riley was hospitalized with a fractured femur, the thigh bone. The explanation provided by Marty and the Tichenell family defied basic physics and medical knowledge. They claimed Riley had broken the strongest, thickest bone in the human body by lying on the floor and kicking a wall. and further claimed they had not noticed the injury for several hours, despite the fact that femur fractures cause immediate, excruciating pain and render the victim unable to walk. Any medical professional understands that fracturing a femur in a 5-year-old requires enormous force, the kind generated by car accidents, severe falls from height, or deliberate abuse. A child cannot self-inflict such an injury through ordinary movement. Janice's maternal instincts told her the explanation was absurd, and she began what would become an 8-year campaign to save her daughter's life. She contacted every agency with authority to intervene. Child protective services at both county and state levels, local police departments, state police, women's resource centers, medical clinics, hospitals, and the family court itself. Each contact produced the same result. Her concerns were documented but not investigated. Her reports were filed but not acted upon. Her pleas for emergency intervention were met with procedural delays or outright dismissal. The system constructed to protect children was actively working against the mother attempting to rescue her own daughter from ongoing torture. The abuse escalated when Riley turned 6 years old in 2016. She began complaining to Janice that her private areas hurt. Over several visits, feeling safe in her mother's presence, Riley disclosed that her father was sexually abusing her. Janice immediately took Riley to a local medical clinic for examination. The physician documented 2 distinct anal tears, one at the 10 o'clock position and another at 1 o'clock, using the medical convention of describing locations on the body as positions on a clock face. These findings constituted physical evidence of penetrative sexual assault. Janice filed for emergency custody, and for several weeks, Riley remained with her mother, the only sustained period of safety she had experienced in years. During this time, Riley revealed another secret she had previously been too frightened to share. It was Sherry Tichenal who beat her back with a belt, leaving severe welts and bruises. Armed with medical documentation and her daughter's testimony, Janice again contacted every possible agency, submitted the evidence to Child Protective Services, notified women's advocacy centers, and filed petitions directly with Judge England's court. She believed that concrete medical proof of sexual abuse would finally compel the system to act. The reality proved more devastating than she could have imagined. No agency initiated an investigation. Medical reports documenting anal tears in a 6-year-old child were ignored. Riley's testimony was not deemed credible. Janice's petitions were dismissed as the complaints of a vindictive ex-partner, rather than the desperate warnings of a protective mother. Parallel to the failures of child welfare agencies and the court system, a separate battle was unfolding at Riley's elementary school. During kindergarten and first grade, Riley attended public school, where educators observed her condition daily. Teachers, particularly physical education instructor Carrie Celebrity, recognized that Riley was displaying classic signs of ongoing abuse. Miss Celebrity became Riley's advocate, filing 19 separate reports of suspected abuse with Child Protective Services during the period Riley attended school. 19 documented attempts to trigger intervention. She later told investigators that she contacted authorities at least once per week. Riley exhibited behavioral patterns consistent with a child desperate for safety and affection. She would cling to adults at school, wrapping her arms around Miss Celebrity's waist and her legs around the teacher's legs, saying, "I love you, could you be my mommy?" It was obvious to staff that Riley desperately wanted to remain at school, the only environment where she felt protected. Additionally, Riley showed signs of chronic malnutrition. When school meals included substantial portions, such as mashed potatoes with gravy, Riley would lick her tray completely clean, consuming every molecule of food available. Meanwhile, Marty and the Tichenal family told school staff that Riley had an eating disorder and requested that cafeteria workers not provide her with any food. But Riley herself contradicted this instruction, approaching cafeteria employees and openly stating, "They don't let me eat at home," begging for extra portions. When the volume of abuse reports from the school reached a critical threshold in early 2017, Marty and Julie implemented a simple solution to eliminate the problem of mandatory reporters. They withdrew all children in the household from public school under the pretext of homeschooling. This action removed the only consistent adult witnesses to Riley's condition. West Virginia law at the time allowed parents to remove children from public school and declare homeschool intentions without requiring proof of educational activity or permitting any welfare checks. From this point forward, Riley was completely isolated with her abusers. Testimony from one of the other children in the household, provided during the subsequent criminal investigation, revealed the systematic nature of Riley's torture during her final 18 months. Thirst was weaponized as punishment. Riley was forbidden from drinking any liquid for 3-day periods. The witness recalled catching Riley multiple times drinking water from the toilet, driven by desperation. Hunger became another tool of control. Sherry Tichenor allowed Riley only one sandwich per day, cut into small pieces in a deliberate act of humiliation designed to emphasize Riley's subordinate status. Riley was forced to sleep on the bare floor without pillows or blankets, wearing only a diaper despite being 7 and 8 years old. Physical punishments included beatings with wooden objects, spoons, and spatulas. On one occasion, in front of guests visiting the home, Sherry poured a milkshake over Riley's head as a demonstration of her contempt for the child's human dignity. Psychological isolation compounded the physical abuse. Other children in the household were explicitly forbidden from speaking to Riley. If any child was caught communicating with Riley, they would lose their phone privileges for months. In the car, Riley was deliberately seated separately from other children to prevent any interaction. Educational abuse completed the pattern of dehumanization. Riley's designated place during the day was standing in the hallway, not permitted to touch the walls. If she touched a wall, she would be required to walk up and down the hallway all day without stopping. She was forbidden from speaking or using the bathroom. Concurrent with the physical and psychological torture, Riley was subjected to what medical experts would later classify as medical child abuse, also known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. By the time of her death, Riley was being forced to take 7 powerful psychiatric medications simultaneously, an extraordinary pharmaceutical burden for a 51-pound body. The medications included risperidone for aggression and mood disorders, citalopram for anxiety and depression, valproic acid as an anticonvulsant, Vivance and clonidine for attention deficit disorder, trazodone as an antidepressant, and naltrexone, which blocks opioid receptors. Dr. Joan Phillips, a pediatrician specializing in child abuse cases with 22 years of experience, later testified that in her entire career, she had never encountered a child of Riley's age prescribed such a quantity of psychiatric medications. All of these drugs were prescribed based solely on behavioral descriptions provided by Marty. Hand the Tichenor family to physicians, descriptions that directly contradicted school reports, indicating Riley had exhibited no behavioral problems in the classroom. In July 2018, around Riley's 8th birthday, Janice attempted to arrange a visit for Riley's birthday weekend. Marty did not answer phone calls or messages. Janice went to the last address she had on record for Marty's residence and found an abandoned house, completely vacant. In panic, she contacted Child Protective Services with an urgent report. She did not know her daughter's location and had been unable to contact her for weeks. The response exemplified the systemic dysfunction that characterized every attempt to protect Riley. Each agency told Janice to contact a different agency. No one accepted responsibility for locating a missing child with a documented history of abuse allegations. No one initiated a search. Meanwhile, Marty and Julie had relocated the blended household to a small rental property at 468 Park Street in Oak Hill without registering the address change with the court or notifying Janice of Riley's new location, both violations of the custody order. Janice continued filing complaints with Child Protective Services, petitioning for court hearings and begging to be granted full custody based on Riley's disclosure of sexual abuse. Every attempt was met with either bureaucratic indifference or active hostility from Judge England. In one hearing, according to Janice's later testimony, Judge England stated he was tired of her constant filings and told her, "If I gave her to your custody and something happened and she died, it would be my fault." He then prohibited Janice from filing any further petitions, threatening that if she submitted any additional paperwork to his court, He would place Riley in state custody and ensure that Janice never saw her daughter again. He concluded by saying, "Stop before you destroy what you have." Janice did not know that she had already seen Riley for the final time nearly a year earlier. In the days leading up to December 26, 2018, Riley became severely ill. According to the testimony of other children in the house, Riley was so sick 3 to 4 days before her death that she could not get out of bed. No one brought her food, water, or medicine during this period. On Christmas Day, Riley was too ill to show interest in presents. Her breathing had become labored, producing a snoring, gasping sound described by the witness as like a pug breathes. When the adults discussed the possibility of taking Riley to a hospital, Julie asked Riley if she felt okay about spending Christmas in a medical facility. Riley said yes, that she wanted to go to the hospital. They did not take her. The adults concluded she was pretending to be sick for attention, a rationalization that would cost Riley her life. On the morning of December 26th, Marty left for work at 6 o'clock. At 9 in the morning, Julie left for her job, leaving Sherry Tichenell alone supervising the children. According to Sherry's subsequent statement to investigators, Riley was in the shower when she developed a nosebleed. While still in the shower, Riley began shaking and then collapsed face down on the ceramic tile floor. Sherry claimed she picked Riley up, carried her to a mattress on the floor of an adjacent bedroom, propped her upright with pillows, and then called 911 at 11:42 a.m. The child was experiencing agonal breathing, an irregular pattern of deep, gasping breaths that sound like snoring or choking, an involuntary reflex indicating active death. The 911 operator could hear Riley's death rattle through the phone during Sherry's call. Riley arrived at Plateau Medical Center at 11:55 a.m. A team of 5 to 6 nurses immediately began resuscitation efforts, administering intravenous fluids and medications, performing CPR and other life-saving interventions. But Riley showed no signs of life on arrival. Her heart was not beating. Her body temperature was so low that hospital equipment could not register a reading, only indicating it was below 84 degrees Fahrenheit. At 12:27 p.m., 34 minutes after her arrival, 8-year-old Riley Jolene Browning was pronounced dead. What the emergency room staff discovered when they removed Riley's clothing shocked professionals who had worked in pediatric trauma for decades. A nurse with 18 years of experience later testified she had never seen a child's body in such condition. Bruises, scratches, burns, and scabs covered Riley's face, neck, chest, back, abdomen, arms, and legs. Some bruises were fresh, purple and red. Others had faded to yellow and green, indicating injuries inflicted days or weeks earlier. Multiple small wounds with scabs dotted her skin. On her right thigh was a second-degree burn consistent with contact from a lit cigarette. Blood was present on her genitals. There was a tear in her rectal area, evidence of ongoing sexual abuse. In her underwear, investigators found a long black hair matching Sherry Tichenell's hair. The official cause of death was sepsis resulting from untreated necrotizing pneumonia. The chief medical examiner noted in the autopsy report that lung disease of this magnitude would not have developed suddenly and would have manifested symptoms easily noticeable to any ordinary person for days before death. Riley's last recorded words, spoken to the adults who were supposed to care for her, were, "I want to go to the hospital," a desperate plea to save her own life that went unheeded. Charlotte James Dawkins was born on December 11, 2013, during a snowstorm in New Jersey, weighing 6 pounds 6 ounces with a head covered in dark hair that would later turn golden blonde. Her parents, 18-year-old Caitlin and 19-year-old Anthony, were exceptionally young and their relationship proved unstable. From infancy, Charlotte possessed what family members described as a magnetic personality. Her smile could disarm the most reserved adult. Her laugh had a distinctive quality that relatives compared to silver bells, bright and musical. She had vivid blue eyes that radiated trust. The most significant person in Charlotte's early life was Kristen, a 17-year-old girl who was Caitlin's stepsister through complicated family connections. When Kristen first held newborn Charlotte, she later recalled feeling an immediate, profound bond that transcended their technical relationship as aunt and niece. Charlotte could not pronounce Aunt Kristen and called her Aunt Tia, a nickname that became permanent. By early 2014, Caitlin and Anthony's relationship had ended permanently. Anthony largely disappeared from Charlotte's life, appearing only sporadically. Caitlin, now a single mother, moved with Charlotte into the home of her father, James. At her grandfather's house, Charlotte was safe and deeply loved. Grandpa James called her Ladybug. Every weekend, Kristen visited, and the three of them spent time together playing, watching cartoons, going to McDonald's. Charlotte grew into a happy child who refused to conform to traditional gender expectations. She would wear a pink tutu with a Batman t-shirt or a tiara with a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles costume. Her favorite song was "You Are My Sunshine," which was symbolically appropriate because she embodied sunshine for everyone who knew her. She had a distinctive laugh that was contagious and joyful. Her enthusiastic hugs became legendary in the family, so tight and wholehearted that people could feel her love radiating through her small body. For 2.5 years, Charlotte lived in this secure environment surrounded by her grandfather and aunt's affection. In the summer of 2016, everything changed. 21-year-old Caitlin met Travis Graham, a 20-year-old man with a significant criminal history. He had accumulated 10 prior convictions by age 20, including a violent offense he committed as a juvenile. He had a 4-year-old son from a previous relationship. Caitlin fell deeply in love almost immediately. Travis appeared to her to be ideal, a young father who understood the challenges of raising a child. He lived in a townhouse with his parents in a suburban neighborhood that seemed respectable. Within a few weeks, Caitlin made a decision that would have fatal consequences. She packed 3-year-old Charlotte's belongings and moved from the safety of her grandfather, his home, into Travis, his family's house. Grandma Renee objected strenuously to this plan, but Caitlin did not listen to her mother's concerns. The living situation at Travis's house was complicated and unstable. In addition to Travis and his parents, his ex-girlfriend Chelsea was temporarily residing there with their shared son, creating a scenario where 2 former romantic partners, their children, and a new girlfriend all lived under one roof. This arrangement was inherently volatile. Chelsea observed the household dynamics and would later provide investigators with important testimony. She witnessed Caitlin yelling at Charlotte and squeezing her cheeks with her fingers so forcefully that bruises appeared. However, Chelsea also noted that Charlotte never seemed afraid of Travis. On the contrary, Charlotte appeared attached to him. For 3-year-old Charlotte, Travis became a favored adult. Only Travis was permitted to put her to bed, paint her fingernails, and prepare her meals. He sent daily Snapchat videos to Caitlin, showing Charlotte and himself playing or watching movies together on the couch. This attachment would become the most heartbreaking element of the tragedy, that Charlotte loved the man who would ultimately kill her. In October 2016, Chelsea married and moved out of the house with her son. In January 2017, Travis proposed to Caitlin, and she discovered she was pregnant with his child. From an external perspective, the situation appeared positive, a young couple preparing to expand their family. But Caitlin's relatives began noticing disturbing changes in Charlotte's appearance. Charlotte increasingly appeared with bruises and injuries that lacked clear explanations. A large wound appeared on her foot that resembled a cigarette burn. Caitlin claimed it resulted from tight shoes. In January 2017, Grandma Renee observed a suspicious bruise on Charlotte. When she attempted to discuss it with Caitlin and threatened to contact Child Protective Services, Caitlin made a devastating choice. She severed all contact with her mother and prohibited her from seeing Charlotte. January 18, 2017, was the last time Renee saw her granddaughter alive. During this period, Travis was descending deeper into drug addiction, specifically heroin and Xanax. To finance his addiction, he began committing armed robberies. In February 2017, he robbed a convenience store using a toy gun. A man living with a 3-year-old child was both a drug addict and an armed robber, yet no authority intervened. On March 12, 2017, Travis and his mother drove to New York to deliver Travis's son to his ex-wife for a scheduled visit. Charlotte accompanied them. What occurred that day would be the final opportunity to save Charlotte's life, an opportunity that went unrecognized. When they arrived in New York, Charlotte, typically joyful and energetic, was behaving strangely. She still ran to the familiar man, calling out, Uncle Blaze, but when he picked her up, Charlotte suddenly began crying and screaming, "Hurt, hurt," while pressing her small hands to her stomach. This was not a childish tantrum. It was a cry of genuine physical pain, pain that had been tormenting her for at least a week, but which she had not been able to articulate. In that moment, a 3-year-old child was attempting to communicate what words could not convey. That she hurt every day, that it hurt to breathe, that it hurt simply to exist. But the adults present interpreted her distress as misbehavior. Travis's mother casually explained that Charlotte had fallen from a bed. No one found it alarming that an active, mobile child supposedly fell and injured herself constantly. For months, the family had become accustomed to explanations. She fell, she hit something, she's clumsy. But the most critical moment came when it was time to leave. Travis said the simple words, "Time to go home to mommy." Charlotte reacted the way a child reacts when they know punishment awaits them at home. She said, "No, I don't want to go to mommy. I'll stay here." These were not ordinary protests. This was a desperate plea for rescue from a 3-year-old girl who understood that home equaled pain, but no adult comprehended the significance of her words. No one heard her plea. 18 hours later, Charlotte would be in a coma with a shattered skull. After nearly a year of investigation, on December 9, 2019, Sherry Tichenell, Marty Browning Jr., and Julie Tichenell Browning were arrested on charges related to Riley's death, specifically child neglect resulting in death. In June 2022, following a 3-week trial, all 3 defendants were found guilty of child neglect resulting in death. However, they were acquitted of the more serious charge of child murder by abuse, which would have carried a potential sentence of life imprisonment. Each defendant received 3 to 15 years in prison, a sentence that many observers, including Riley's family and advocacy groups, considered a mockery of justice. Judge Paul Blake stated during sentencing, "If you had taken the steps of any caring, humane person, she would be alive today." Janice spoke at the sentencing hearing, directing her words toward her daughter's father. "You failed miserably. Yes, Julie and Sherry participated, but you and I had a duty to take care of our daughter." Following Riley's death, Democratic delegate Sean Fluharty proposed legislation known as Riley's Law, which would prohibit parents from withdrawing children from public school for homeschooling purposes if those children were currently under investigation by Child Protective Services. During floor debate on the proposed law, Delegate Fluharty gave an impassioned speech clarifying the law's intent. He emphasized that the legislation was not targeting homeschooling as an educational choice, but rather was designed to close a loophole that allowed child abusers to eliminate the oversight provided by mandatory reporters, such as teachers. He pointed out that Judge Blake, who presided over the sentencing of Riley's killers, had explicitly stated that the state bore partial responsibility for what happened to Riley Browning because the law permitted a child to be removed from school and homeschooled without any real mechanism to ensure the child's continued education and safety. Judge Blake had added that as a circuit judge, he was observing more and more cases of abused and neglected children being withdrawn from school for homeschooling, specifically so that parents or guardians could hide their ongoing abuse. Delegate Fluharty emphasized that the proposed law would apply only in cases where parents had been convicted of child abuse or domestic violence, or where an active investigation was pending temporary restrictions that would be lifted once investigations were resolved. On July 26, 2019, in a courtroom in New Jersey, Travis Graham appeared for sentencing in Charlotte's murder. The court showed a video compilation of photographs depicting Charlotte as a laughing girl in a pink tutu and Batman shirt, a child radiating joy and trust. Travis refused to watch, staring at the table in front of him. The prosecutor noted for the record that the case had taken a toll not only on Charlotte's family, but also on all the medical personnel who had attempted to save her, but could not. The prosecutor described the photographs taken during Charlotte's brief stay at the hospital as brutal to look at, explaining that Charlotte's family had been forced to see with their own eyes what abuse had done to that adorable, happy face. The prosecutor noted that Charlotte's face was so bruised and swollen that she was almost unrecognizable, and the only way to identify her was by the curly blonde hair. The prosecutor added that Charlotte's organ donation had been a gift, allowing other people to live. The prosecutor then posed a rhetorical question that resonated throughout the courtroom. No one can ever begin to understand how it is humanly possible for a grown man, even if he's a boy on the inside, he is in the body of a grown man, to put his hands on a beautiful little girl who is not quite 3.5 years old. Travis's defense attorney stated that his client had accepted responsibility for all charges and noted that the only positive aspect of the plea agreement was that it avoided a protracted and extremely painful trial for Charlotte's family members. The judge observed that Travis looked stone-faced as he awaited sentencing and stated, "I have to say that I see nothing that suggests to this court that he's remorseful that this event happened. I see nothing. I hear nothing." When given the opportunity to make a statement before sentencing, Travis declined, saying only no. Kristen attended the sentencing hearing wearing pink socks with bows in honor of Charlotte's favorite things. She addressed Travis directly, her voice breaking with emotion. "You robbed her of an entire life. We'll never see her first day of school, graduation, wedding. You're not a man, you're a coward." She continued, reminding everyone in the courtroom that Travis had confessed to backhanding a 3-year-old child with such force that she spun in the air and fell face first down a flight of stairs, and that his justification was that the child had pinched him during an argument. She asked, "In what world does a man handle a child in this way?" She concluded, "You were the furthest thing from a man. You, Travis Graham, are a coward." Grandma Renee spoke through tears, saying, "I choose forgiveness, but justice must prevail." She spoke of the wedding day that would never be celebrated, the great-grandchild she would never meet. She said, "These are the scars he has left on the hearts of everyone that has loved my granddaughter, my ladybug." She added that while some people wished Travis peace and forgiveness, she hoped that he would see Charlotte's face in his dreams, hear her giggles when he was alone, and that these visions would cause him to lose sleep and give him no peace. The judge noted Travis's complete lack of remorse, observing, "I see a stone face. He doesn't regret what he did." Travis Graham currently sits in prison. In 2044, he will become eligible to apply for early release. He will be 48 years old at that time. He will have the opportunity for a new life, for everything he took away from a 3-year-old girl. Caitlin divorced Travis after his arrest. She regained custody of her second daughter, had a third child, and continues her life. Kristen is raising Charlotte's younger sister, showing her videos where her big sister pops out of a tent and shouts, "Tada!" And now the younger sister repeats the same gesture. As of 2025, Riley's law remains under consideration in the West Virginia State Senate, where it has been pending for years despite support from child welfare advocates, educators, and the judge who sentenced Riley's killers. The legislative process has stalled due to opposition from homeschooling advocacy groups, who argue that the law represents government overreach into family autonomy, despite the law's narrow scope, applying only to families with active abuse investigations or prior convictions. This stalemate represents a broader national debate about how to balance parental rights with child protection, a debate that has intensified as homeschooling rates have increased dramatically. Child welfare experts point to Riley's case as a textbook example of how current laws create a loophole that enables abusers to eliminate oversight by removing children from environments where mandatory reporters, such as teachers, school nurses, and counselors, can observe and document signs of abuse. The statistics support their concerns. Studies conducted by child advocacy organizations have found that children who are withdrawn from school and subsequently die from abuse or neglect are disproportionately likely to have been subjects of prior abuse reports. Yet legislative action remains elusive, blocked by political considerations and lobbying efforts that prioritize abstract principles over concrete child safety measures. Riley's mother, Janice, continues to advocate for stronger child protection laws, speaking publicly about the systemic failures that cost her daughter's life. She has testified before legislative committees, participated in documentary projects, and worked with advocacy organizations to push for reforms. Her message is consistent. The system, as currently designed, prioritizes bureaucratic procedure over child welfare, allows judges excessive discretion without accountability, and provides insufficient resources for child protective services, to investigate the volume of reports they receive. The parallels between Riley's case and Charlotte's case extend beyond the immediate circumstances of their deaths. Both girls were killed by adults who should have protected them. Both exhibited visible signs of ongoing abuse that were observed by multiple people. Both were subjects of reports to Child Protective Services that were either not investigated or not acted upon. Both had mothers who made devastating choices to prioritize relationships with abusive men over their daughters' safety. Both had at least one adult who fought desperately to save them, but was ignored by the system. And both were ultimately failed by institutions designed specifically to prevent exactly these outcomes. The question that haunts everyone familiar with these cases is, how does this happen? How do children die from prolonged, systematic torture in a modern society with child protection agencies, mandatory reporting laws, family courts, and criminal justice systems specifically structured to prevent such tragedies? The answer lies in understanding the multiple, interconnected failures that must occur simultaneously for a child to fall through every safety net. First, there is the failure of individual responsibility. In both cases, adults who witnessed signs of abuse rationalized what they saw or convinced themselves that someone else would intervene. The phenomenon known as diffusion of responsibility means that when multiple people are aware of a problem, each individual feels less personal obligation to act because they assume others will address it. Second, there is the failure of professional judgment. Child Protective Services workers are overwhelmed with caseloads that make thorough investigation impossible. They must triage reports, prioritizing cases that appear most urgent, which means that chronic abuse situations may receive less attention than acute crises. Workers become desensitized to reports and develop cynicism about allegations, particularly when reports come from estranged parents involved in custody disputes. Third, there is the failure of judicial discretion. Family court judges wield enormous power over children's lives, yet they face minimal oversight and accountability. Judges may develop biases based on their personal experiences or beliefs about parenting, family structure, and the appropriate role of government intervention. In Riley's case, Judge Matthew Dean, England, maintained a custody arrangement that gave primary custody to the abusive parent despite mounting evidence of danger, and he ultimately threatened the protective parent with loss of all custody if she continued seeking help. His decisions were not subject to meaningful review or appeal. Fourth, there is the failure of systemic coordination. Child protection requires cooperation between multiple agencies: Child Protective Services, law enforcement, schools, medical providers, and courts. But these agencies operate independently with separate databases, different protocols, and sometimes conflicting priorities. Information about Riley's situation was scattered across numerous agencies and individuals, but no single entity had a complete picture of the cumulative evidence. Teachers filed 19 reports that went into a Child Protective Services database. Janice filed additional reports with police. Medical professionals documented injuries. But these separate pieces of information were never synthesized into a comprehensive assessment that would have made the severity of Riley's situation undeniable. Fifth, there is the failure of legal structure. Laws governing child protection are often written to prioritize family reunification and parental rights over child safety, based on the presumption that children are generally better off with biological parents than in foster care. While this presumption is correct in most cases, it creates systematic bias against protective intervention in the minority of cases where parents pose genuine danger. Laws also create high evidentiary standards for removing children from parental custody, requiring proof beyond reasonable doubt or clear and convincing evidence standards that are difficult to meet when abuse occurs behind closed doors and young children cannot provide articulate testimony. Sixth, there is the failure of resource allocation. Child Protective Services agencies nationwide are chronically underfunded and understaffed. Workers carry caseloads 2 to 3 times what is considered manageable, making thorough investigation impossible. Agencies lack funding for adequate training, supervision, and support services. The result is high turnover, low morale, and a workforce that is simply unable to perform its mission effectively, regardless of individual workers' dedication or competence. Seventh, there is the failure of cultural attitudes. Society remains deeply ambivalent about intervention in family life, viewing such intervention as appropriate only in the most extreme circumstances. There is cultural resistance to the idea that the state can be a better parent than a biological parent, resistance rooted in both libertarian political philosophy and historical examples of government overreach. This cultural ambivalence translates into political resistance to funding child protection adequately, judicial reluctance to remove children from parental custody except in the most egregious cases, and social pressure against individuals who report suspected abuse. When all 7 of these failures occur simultaneously, children die. Riley Browning and Charlotte Dawkins died because individual adults made wrong choices, because professionals exercised poor judgment, because judges abused their discretion, because systems failed to coordinate, because laws prioritized the wrong values, because agencies lacked resources, and because culture sent the message that intervention was suspect. The tragedy is not that any single person or institution failed, but that every person and institution failed at once. The reforms necessary to prevent future deaths are clear, though politically difficult. Child Protective Services agencies require funding increases sufficient to reduce caseloads to manageable levels and provide adequate training and support for workers. Mandatory reporting laws need enforcement mechanisms and consequences for agencies that fail to investigate reports. Family court judges need oversight, accountability, and specialized training in child abuse dynamics. Information systems need integration so that scattered reports are consolidated into comprehensive pictures. Legal standards need rebalancing to prioritize child safety over parental rights in cases where there is credible evidence of serious harm, and cultural attitudes need to shift toward acceptance of intervention as a necessary tool to protect vulnerable children, not an intrusion to be minimized. The legacy of Riley Browning and Charlotte Dawkins depends on whether their deaths catalyze meaningful reform or simply become 2 more entries in the endless catalogue of preventable tragedies. Delegate Fluharty's efforts to pass Riley's Law represent one concrete attempt at reform, though even that modest measure, which would only prevent abusers from using homeschooling to eliminate oversight, has faced years of legislative obstruction. More comprehensive reforms face even steeper obstacles. Yet the alternative, accepting that a certain number of children will inevitably be tortured to death by their caregivers, as the unavoidable cost of preserving family autonomy and limiting government power, is morally intolerable. Every person who encounters a child exhibiting signs of abuse has a choice: to rationalize and look away, or to report and potentially save a life. Every professional who receives a report of abuse has a choice: to minimize and close the case, or to investigate thoroughly and potentially prevent a death. Every judge who hears a custody dispute has a choice: to default to biological parent preferences or to prioritize child safety, even when it requires difficult decisions. Every legislator voting on child protection funding has a choice: to direct resources elsewhere or to invest in systems that work. And every citizen has a choice: to remain passively horrified by stories like Riley's and Charlotte's, or to demand accountability and reform from the institutions responsible for protecting children. Riley Jolene Browning, who loved purple Rapunzel dresses and was called Sunshine because of her strawberry blonde hair catching the light, would be 14 years old today if the system had worked. Charlotte James Dawkins, who wore tiaras with Batman costumes because she believed you could be both a princess and a superhero, would be 11 years old. They are gone. Their futures, all the ordinary milestones of childhood and adolescence and adulthood, all the joy they would have experienced and given to others, all the potential they carried, extinguished by preventable failures. Their legacy is the question they leave for everyone who learns their stories. Will we finally make the changes necessary to protect the next child? Or will we continue to accept that such deaths are simply the inevitable price of our current system?